Good morning. Welcome. This is Tim Selden. With me today here at the Global Classroom, the webinar that is run every week by the Montessori Foundation's Center for Montessori Leadership, is my son, Mark Selden. Mark is the administrator of the Center for Guided Montessori Studies. He is also the headmaster and founder of the Renaissance Montessori School in Cary, North Carolina. Mark has an MBA in marketing, and those of you who have attended his presentations at various conferences know that he has a unique voice and unique perspectives. With us also is my co-host, Kathy Leach. Kathy is a Montessori educator, national consultant and speaker as well. She is the headmistress of the Renaissance Montessori School of Fort Myers, Florida, and she is a member of the International Montessori Council Board of Trustees, and she is one of the commissioners of the IMC School Accreditation Program. Welcome, Kathy. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Tim. Glad to be here.
Good morning.
Okay, hopefully everyone can see Mark and Kathy and my video camera. And Mark, I'm going to hand it over to you, and we're going to watch for questions. And Kathy and I are going to kibitz in. Tell us a little bit about 21st century marketing for Montessori schools.
All right, very good. First of all, thank you all very much for coming to this. This is a big passion of mine. I'm as you know, a third-generation Montessorian through my father and grandmother, and so even though I'm actually very involved in other things besides Montessori, Montessori is very close to my heart, and I've given this presentation in different forms at different conferences. It may be a little deep for 1 hour, but we'll do the best we can. I tend to be a kinetic speaker. I move around, I dance around, I really try to involve the audience, and this is unusual for me to have so many invisible people on the other end of the line. So I hope that some of you invisible people will reach out and ask a lot of questions and help keep the energy of this thing going. So 21st century marketing. Let me just start by saying it sounds like a lot of jazz. What is 21st century marketing? Is it really different than 20th century marketing or even 19th century marketing? As we get into it, I think you'll understand the ways in which it is similar and different. But let's just start with sort of a basic question, which is what is advertising and versus marketing? Are they the same thing? You know, is marketing the same thing as advertising? And the answer is very clearly no. Advertising is a piece of the marketing plan. You might say it is one of the ways we implement a marketing plan. But marketing is much more than advertising. And in fact, that's one of the ways that we'll see 21st century marketing is different, is that advertising in some ways is actually less essential and a smaller piece of how we reach our customers than it ever used to be. So who are your customers? This is one of the things that's been fascinating to me. I've done a lot of consultation with Montessori schools over the years, and I can't believe how many people have no idea who their customers are. No, what do I mean by that? Of course they know who's walking in and out, but they would find it hard to identify them. And in other words, you know, is everyone who walks through the door a customer? Is literally everyone who's walking through the door a customer? Well, you ask people, and they're probably going to say no, not really. But so then the question is, what separates a good lead from a bad lead, right? When someone walks through that door, how are you deciding whether they are actually going to be worth investing a lot of time? Can you tell quickly? Does it take a while? What are the things? For me, one of the things that I identify very quickly is that when someone calls my school, and the first thing they ask is, what is my daily rate or my weekly rate? You know, that's the first question out of their mouth. I'm thinking, you know, this might not be someone who's a perfect match for my school. You know, the things that they are bringing to the equation are not necessarily the things that are a perfect match for my particular institution. Now, my school, it's a small school. It's kind of a boutique school. We've just started our elementary program. We're in our third year. We're doing well. We're growing rapidly, but it's never going to be a giant school. There are many different kinds of schools out there, and so what works for us is not necessarily going to work for you. But you will want to think about, when you understand who works as a customer, you know, who works in your community, you know, who you're happy to have, can you divide them in some ways? You know, are there different patterns you see? For example, you know, I would consider one of our good segments might to be, the kind of the artsier people. Some of these people have actually themselves gone to Montessori. They certainly know what Montessori is. Another segment that really works for us tend to be the very educated people. There's obviously possibility of overlap here, but some people come to us and they know nothing about Montessori, but they are open and there's something about what they bring to the equation that makes it a very good match. I can tell that they are open to what we have to offer, and that their philosophy about child rearing is going to be similar to ours. And generally, if I look at them, these people may not be from the upper class or from even the upper middle class, but they're bringing a certain artsy sensibility to things. That works for us. That may not work for you. Similarly, there are schools right here in North Carolina where I live that are that's absolutely not what they're looking for. They tend to be very, I would call them upper crust, but that's not necessarily a word they would use, but a fairly professional school with, everything, the facility is very, very shiny. All the materials are shiny and new. That's all very nice. That's very good. And their customers are absolutely going to be the doctors and the lawyers, and that's what they're looking for. So once you know who your customers are, the question is, how do you reach them?
Mark,
Now,
can I
yeah,
interrupt for just a second?
please do.
Because when you're talking about who your customer is, and I know you talked about some arts folks, and certainly your well-educated sector of your community. I've also found that we tend to be very appealing to people who are entrepreneurs and trendsetters, and that may or may not be true for your school. But what I've found is that people who are used to making their own decisions, thinking for themselves, not really sort of following the pack, not necessarily doing what their neighbors are doing, are people who are willing to try something new or different, even if they've not heard of Montessori before. It makes sense to them, some of the things that we are focusing on as outcomes in our school. So just one more group I wanted to throw in there for you.
Right, and I would say that this is different for every school. And I would not say what is true for my school would be true for even a school 20 miles from where I live.
So, Mark, just to sum it up, if I'm hearing correctly, and we've talked about this so many times, every school's different. Some schools just really specialize in early childhood. They may have an infant toddler program. They may have a very, very strong early childhood. They may not be interested in elementary, and what they're doing is either offering very, very long extended hours, very, very family friendly and convenient. Other people are essentially operating out of a home-like environment, and that's part of the particular ethos. And the key is know your own school. Once you know your school and you have a sense of who are the people who seem to love you the most, and it won't be the same for all schools. Once you know that, then you can begin to ask, how do I make the phone ring? How do I reach out and cause people to approach me, not only who are looking for something, but rather looking for something pretty close to who we are, so the odds of making a good sale and having a happy relationship with that family grow up.
I think that's accurate. I really wish that Rachel Kincaid, who is sort of the daily head of school at my school right now, was here. She would have a lot to offer to this conversation in terms of the research that she's done for our particular families. She's really very good at a lot of these things. So perhaps in the next session of this, we might bring her on board and she could tell us a little bit about the research she's been doing. But what I would say is not that I disagree with Kathy. In fact, I also have seen a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of small business owners come to us. But this is definitely a more general idea that you'd want to start by understanding, who is it? Who is it in your school that's working? And how do I reach more of those people? Now, in the past, how do we reach them? Let me just throw this out there. How have you all been doing marketing? How did you used to reach your customers?
Well, our people aren't really responding, and I want to remind everyone, if you have a question or you want to make a comment, on the right side of your screen there is a little panel, and you can type things like instant messaging, and you can communicate with us that way. By the way, I noticed that Shelley DeBar has her hand up.
Oh, good.
And Shelley, if you have anything that you want to say, we keep everyone muted so we don't get an echo effect. But please jump in, and I'm looking for anything that you want to say or ask. Amber says word of mouth. Linda says print ads usually.
Hmm.
Um, and a lot of word of mouth. Laurie says we
Hmm.
use social media.
Oh.
Nora says social media. Charlie says our best advertising has been parent word of mouth. Deborah says almost exclusively word of mouth. One
Hmm.
of the things that I want to throw in here is that word of mouth has always been the most powerful, because when someone who's an existing parent in a school or a past parent says something really strong and supportive of a school, it's much more believable than you are. 1 month after a parent has enrolled a child in your school, you start to sound like the parents or the adults in the Charlie Brown's Peanuts cartoons. In other words, the parents stop listening to us. Whereas another parent, whether they're saying something good or something negative, or even asking questions that inspire a lack of confidence, that tends to be incredibly believable. So word of mouth is great. The problem is it's tricky to control it. Community marketing too, I see from Nora. As an aside, I'll jump in here. I've traditionally used a lot of print advertising as part of my mix. At our lab school, the Newgate School, we take out full page ads in the local family magazine. We run smaller ads on a regular, almost monthly basis in the city magazine, SRQ. We also sponsor public talks. Steve Hughes is coming down to give a big public address here next week. Paul Epstein will be down here giving a talk in a few weeks. I just went to another school in Saskatoon last week, gave a talk up there, and they packed the house with it. That's marketing. You get a lot of people that way. When I went up to Saskatoon, they got me as a guest speaker on public TV. They arranged for a print ad, or excuse me, a print media interview, and they had me on radio with very, very little advance notice. These are all other strategies to make the phone ring.
Okay.
Back to you, Mark.
Okay. Um, that was great. Okay, so yeah, so I basically have heard a lot of, I've heard a little bit of the past and a little bit of the future, or the present, if you will. Um, Certainly in the past, we've always relied on word of mouth. Word of mouth has always been big, and also print. Um, the question is, where do parents look for schools now? And do different segments look in different ways? How do the other schools in your area market? How are they reaching the people they want to reach, if they're trying to reach the same people you are? These are all questions you're going to need to ask yourself if you want to succeed in or strengthen your marketing effort. Um, One of the questions that I think is most difficult to address, but probably the most important one if your school is struggling, is to ask yourself, how would you go about choosing a school if you knew nothing about Montessori? If you know, what would be your process? Let's assume that you had the same philosophy you had now, that you had the same emotional connection to children, but you didn't know what Montessori was, and you were very interested in finding a school. Um, think about all these factors. There is no answer to these things, by the way. Um, these are deep questions that don't have any simple answer that can be provided outside of consultation. Um, Retention. Retention is a marketing function. And one of the things to always think about is the cost of replacing a Montessori family. I know that my dad often says things like a Montessori family can never be replaced. Well, yeah, I guess in a sense, there is a pain that is never undone when you lose a really good family. There's a hole in your community. But from a business perspective, it's even more difficult to address because there is that cost. How do you replace that family? It hurts your marketing efforts. It doesn't look good for your school. It doesn't have a good feeling. It sort of ends up, the more people you lose, the more ickiness you sort of feel in your community. But there is a very legitimate and measurable cost of replacing people. And retaining is usually much cheaper. Oops. When I talk to schools, one of the things that always surprises me is how people don't they don't track things. They don't track re-enrollment rates. Maybe you all are doing this, but my guess is that many of you are not. It is extra effort, but it would be very intriguing to ask yourselves, what has worked in the past? The years that we had the best re-enrollment rates, was there anything we were doing better? Was there anything we did differently? Do you know what works and what doesn't? Again, how well do you know your customers? What's the median age of a parent at your schools? A lot of people can't answer that, or they have to sit and think, well, gee, they're younger than me, so I don't know. And then there's these questions. I mean, I'm always surprised. Somehow or another, I've come to the point where I'm actually older than all the parents at my school. I don't know how that happened, but I guess I got old. And everyone who is coming to the school is finding information in a different way. They instinctively are going to Google when they don't know an answer, versus like me and my friends will sit around and sort of kibitz about something, and then someone younger will say, well, let's just look it up. They have a very different relationship with information. So there's just a lot of these things are questions that you'll have to think to come up with your own marketing plan. You'll have to examine. Again, what makes parents choose your school? What makes them stay? What makes parents leave? The challenge we have is to identify those retention factors that marketing can improve. Let me give you a concrete example of why these questions are useful. If you lose a family, it is painful. And what I find is that it is the easiest thing to do after you've asked them to stay, after you've tried to get them to stay, and they've chosen to leave, the easiest thing to do is to just put it out of your mind and move on. And you don't want to think about it. It almost feels like a little bit of a breakup if you had a good relationship with that family. That's the wrong way to address it. What you need to do, the only way to succeed at improving a business is to find out how you failed. And so the best thing you can do is to talk to parents who stay and to parents who leave and find out what worked and what didn't, and actually come up with a methodological framework to gather concrete numbers. In other words, let's say I have a school of 100 and I've lost 10 families. I just lost 10% of my families. And I don't mean that, let's say that this is not a preschool, this is a school that goes up through, through middle school. So there's no reason they had to leave. These are families that chose to leave. All right. Why did they leave? Well, the right thing to do is to find a way to get the information, the honest information from those who left, so that you can improve your school and understand how to improve your retention efforts. Similarly, and this is another thing people tend to fail at, you need to ask the people who stayed, what made you choose to stay? And what were the things that made you stay? Was it inertia? You would never ask that, but I would assume that's probably not the case. But trying to understand where you're succeeding is just as important as understanding where you're failing. Okay? The promise that draws them may not be the draw that keeps them. The idea of this, what I'm trying to say here is that people come to you for one reason. That may not be why they're staying, right? One of the big things that make people stay at a school are these parent-parent bonds, parent-staff bonds. They love the teacher. They have a good relationship with the teacher. And then, of course, I'm going to put this at the bottom. The idea is the value of the education that they think they're receiving. Now, why did I put that at the bottom? I put that at the bottom because of this old idea of information asymmetry. This is something that I talk about a lot, and I think that Shelley certainly has heard me talk about this before. This is the idea that people can't easily tell whether you're providing a good value. It's very, very difficult in education. Right? And what do the traditional preschools do, the daycares? Well, they send home lots of garbage every day so that these kids can, supposedly show parents all the things they're doing. Well, what you end up with is a lot of garbage that gets recycled, a lot of actually teacher or staff-led, art projects and craft projects, things that basically go into the garbage, but that's what parents are educated to look for. Those are the symbols of education rather than actual evidence of education. So Montessori is very difficult to sell as an educational philosophy because we can't demonstrate it easily. Now, if they come into the classroom, they can see what the kids are doing. Every now and then, there's something really nice, like a pin pushing or something cool that should go home. But a lot of that stuff, that daily assault of recyclable garbage, recyclable nonsense, that stuff just isn't coming home from our schools. And so that, you know, be that as it may, the reality is that a lot of parents who are keeping their kids at our schools are not going to be seeing that as evidence of education. Whether or not they realize that there is education happening, the things that are going to be most intuitive for them are the value they get out of those brief interactions they have with the school. I come into the school, what do I see? I see other parents, and I'm going to talk to them, and I'm going to see the staff. And those are going to be the connections I'm going to have. And so one of the things that I would encourage people to think about is how those brief interactions really do serve a marketing function. All right, and so of course the environment serves a very important marketing function as well, but I would say that this is one of those situations where it's yours to lose. If you have a bad environment, you're going to turn people off. That this is fairly obvious, I suspect. Again, the reason I asked all those questions was to emphasize that research is key, right? You know, I can't answer them for you, but I hope you're going to be asking these questions yourselves. Don't rely on your instincts or anecdotal information. Anecdotes are very, very powerful, right? We hear one person say, well, I found this other school over there and they were, you know, I really liked them because they had horse riding, okay, horseback riding. Okay, well, you know, horseback riding might have been indeed a thing that made that family leave or not. We don't know really. We just know that's what they said. But if that was already a concern I had, that all the other schools have horseback riding, and I'm going to hear that, well, then that's going to my bias is going to be that that's going to confirm my existing expectation. In other words, if there is something that I already suspect and I hear it from someone, I'm going to think, oh, I'm more likely to weight that. And I don't mean like I in a general sense. I mean I as a human being. I do this too. Everyone does this. It's just a normal human behavior. And so what we need to do if we're marketing is to understand the real information that is out there and try to get objective, an objective viewpoint on what's going on at our school. And this doesn't just apply to retention, by the way. One of the things that schools often don't do is follow up with parents who didn't choose to enroll. So we'll be talking about some of these things. One of the easiest ways to handle research is through an impersonal vehicle like SurveyMonkey. What do I say? Or Google Forms. Basically, these are just simple, cheap web, actually in these cases I think they're both free, web forms that allow people to gather information. Now, why do I say impersonal? That's because if there's a painful truth, people are more likely to provide it anonymously than they are, face to face. I'm more likely to tell you it was because I wanted my daughter to take horseback riding than the fact that I thought, this teacher was kind of rude and I just don't have a good feeling about her or whatever the real issue might be. Any questions so far?
Mostly at the last couple of moments, we've just had things from Shelley. Shelley has been talking about how she's really putting a lot of emphasis at her school on parent education and parents confirming to other parents. She just gave an example of how one parent responded to the very example of, I don't see anything that's familiar. Why doesn't the school send home more homework or why isn't there more work product coming home? And how a parent in her school said, no, absolutely, you need to know that it doesn't work that way. You'll hear it in the things that the kids say at the dinner table or what they'll tell you driving home.
Yeah, and it is a very painful thing for a lot of parents to learn, especially when there's so much anxiety about education these days. We're bringing all of our fears about the future into the school building, and so I do think that parent education is important. It plays a very, very big role in terms of strengthening those parent-parent interactions, I would say.
I want to just stress one of the things you just said, Mark. I think that we as people who are in the classroom or leading schools tend to see our school through rose-colored glasses. And those rose-colored glasses may be that the school is much better than it is and completely miss the way parents really perceive it. or we may have this sort of pre-expectation and almost feel guilty about the things that we can't do, or that nothing we do makes parents happy, and we're kind of defensive, or we just stop listening because it's too painful, or we're just so darn busy and up to our necks in it that we don't
Mm-hmm.
really look at what's going on. And what you're really saying to us is somehow or another we need to get meaningful information out of people that they're willing to share and tell us the truth. And secondly, we have to take the time to really hear it, read it, look at it, ask what does it really mean, and then learn from it, use it in some practical way. By the way, we're
I
starting to
think
get lots of things. Deborah's asking, do you have any examples of questions you could use in the survey, Mark?
this is one I really wish Rachel was on for this one because she develops our surveys. But the kinds of things I would ask the very pointed questions. What were the factors that led you to leave? In this case, I'm thinking about a parent who left. I would say, if you can spare $50 for a gift card as a prize. In other words, if you fill out this form, you get a prize, whatever. For that $50, you may get some very important and painful truths delivered to you. And I would ask the basic stuff, like all of the pain points you can think of. Was the quality of the building a factor? Were there services that were not offered that were a factor? How did you find the faculty? How did you find the staff? And ask some specific questions about friendliness and helpfulness and availability and all that good stuff. Did you, one of the things that I would actually really encourage you to do is to remember I talked earlier about parent-parent interactions. Those are so important, and you really want to build up that sense of community. Try to find out, did these people feel that they had any connections to other parents? If they didn't, if you're finding that all the parents who left, or most of them, didn't have connections to other parents, that might tell you, okay, I need to work on that at my school. But again, it all depends on what are you trying to do. In other words, if the question is, if the audience is parents who didn't enroll, people who came, you loved them, you thought they were a great match, and then they chose another school, you're going to be asking different kinds of questions because they don't have that kind of relationship with you yet. But you would still ask the most painful questions you could possibly ask yourself.
So, Mark, I'm sure that Rachel has a number of samples of the questions that she's using right now in her surveys, right?
I would assume, yeah.
Why don't we ask her to share them? And when I send out the email with the link to the recording to all of the people who are registered, we'll include that as PDFs. Now, people might really appreciate that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that would be great, and they can fine-tune it to their own school. I also think doing multiple choice and less open-ended, which Mark mostly gave us examples of sort of either multiple choice or a rating scale of some sort. People rarely take the time to answer the open-ended questions, although you'd love to have a place at least for some comments where they could expand what they were saying.
Yeah.
Sure.
I think, my experience is that if people give you if they answer an open-ended question on a survey, they will answer one open-ended question.
Yeah,
and they will take that space and tell you the most painful thing. The thing that is really pissing them off. They're not going to use that space to talk about anything inferior or even anything good. You're just going to hear that one big negative. And that's fine. You should definitely have that space on a survey.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, something very different. Susan has said, we find these parent-to-parent bonds to be breeding grounds for complaining and negativity results. How do you handle this?
Great question.
That is so true. That is, it can be either, of course, right? And this. So if I were to draw this right now, I would draw it as a network, right? And think of it this way: you as a human being, who happens to be an administrator, participate in a social network. Every member at your school is participating in a social network. It is important that you set the framework to be a healthy social network. This is a very difficult topic. I know that you, Dad, have actually talked about this, the parking lot mafia and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But the short version is that absolutely this is a real issue. And it is not necessarily something that you will always control. I've seen this a few times in my school, and what I do is the second I hear I've gotten wind of there being an issue, I approach directly the parents that might have some issues, and I just bring them into, and I'm like, always honor the problems that they see or their concerns. For this was weird. At some point, we had some really strange rumors going around that the school was going to shut down. And it was like so out of the blue that it didn't, I couldn't even figure out where it was coming from, and people were just asking things. And so, obviously telling people it wasn't true was one step, but the other thing was just to start talking about what we're doing next year, and start making it very clear that we were having plans.
Mm-hmm.
What I would say is that there will always be rumors. There will always be some negativity. I would also suggest that there are certain people who tend to be breeding grounds for that. And if you identify that someone is a particularly poisonous element of the community, sometimes it may not be the right school for that person.
Oh, heaven forbid. You mean we actually can ask someone to leave?
I've done it many times, yes.
We don't get sued for that? We're not violating Montessori principles?
I would argue that you are protecting the people you care about.
This is a very big point, because so many of the schools that we work with they look at the child, they feel so guilty about the child. They say, why would you hurt the child? Because the mother's a pain in the neck. Failing to understand that this kind of behavior out of parents, these parents aren't bad, they're just not happy. And every child deserves to be at a school where his mother and his father respect and can support the school. They certainly don't need to be put in the position where they're in the car listening to their parent on the cell phone, on the speakerphone, bad mouthing the school or bad mouthing the teacher. Because even little kids tend to intuit that something is wrong here. We can't stop it. I definitely agree with you, Mark. You can't stop it. There's going to be some of this in every school. But it's all about admissions. It's all about taking the time before they get in the first place. It's also all about, as you pick things up, as you said, really going to the people who seem to have the problem and really sitting down, and instead of being defensive or aggressive, because you can't make them by threatening them, they're not going to stop. You may say to somebody, Mark, listening to you, it seems pretty clear that what you're looking for is a different kind of school. I don't seem to be able to make you comfortable. And if that's the case, I'm really so sorry, because I'd love for it to work. I love you. I love your kid, and you need to be happy, and you're not happy. And frankly, you're not making my teachers happy.
I agree with you 110%, if I can agree more than 100%. And I would say that extra 10% is because I would try not to let it go that far. We had a guy named let's call him Bob. So Bob was a software programmer, very intellectual, very smart guy, very nice guy, we thought, and I suppose he really is. And his son was in every way that I could measure apparently to me a normally developing child. There was nothing that struck me as of concern with him. But the father's paranoia about his son was egregious, always worrying about his son's development, always At some point, the guy lost his job. So I think we're calling him Bob. So Bob started obsessing about what quality of education he was receiving. And he asked, could he observe the classroom? Absolutely. You're always welcome to observe the classroom. Here's how we observe the classroom, blah, blah, blah. He was not able to follow those rules, and so he would follow his son around the classroom and interfere, and so we had to explain to him, this isn't how we observe. I'd like to ask you to observe through the window, and he found that also very difficult. And so for a number of days, he was literally decamped for several hours a day looking through the window at his son. And it was getting maybe a little creepy and obsessive. And then at one point he said something to one of our teachers, Chris, about, how do I know that, you're really doing a good job? And Chris was in tears because, as you guys know, our teachers, they're not doing this for money, right? They love what they're doing, and they're so passionate about these children. And, to have basically a parent accuse them of harming their children, which is how she took it, is devastating. And so I that was it. I took Bob aside. I said that, Bob, I really don't feel that you're happy here, and I just don't see that this can work because, I want your child to be happy, and I want you to be happy. And he agreed, and that was it. He was gone, and that situation took care of itself very rapidly. Was it painful to give up that tuition? Yes. I'm not saying that there aren't some financial pieces, but what I did end up with is faculty that understood that I backed them, right? Which is immeasurable, I think, especially when you pay people as little as I could afford to pay people. And you also have a chance to keep the community from getting poisoned before this Bob fellow could start spreading rumors and sharing his paranoias with other people. So wherever proactivity is available, I'd say pursue it. I am aware that time is going through, and we actually haven't even gotten to any of the real marketing principles yet. So I'm going to move forward, okay?
Please go ahead. And by the way, if Devora is out there, I am so sorry. I should have sent people a way to do a back channel. So I'm going to set up a place, and you keep going, Mark. I'm going to let you all have a place where you can log in and talk about this. So keep talking, and I'm.
Yeah, I really wish I could see. I really wish I could see people's comments and respond to them. It's kind of.
Well, I think what we need to do is I have set up a thing at today's meet, and I'm going to send out to everyone in a minute the link to it so you can join even after this session. And the conversation shall begin. I'm going to have an ongoing today's meet meeting room for this course, for this series of webinars. And I encourage you, if you do it, and you're able to have one piece of your browser looking at the conversation and one going at the webinar, which is being recorded, even after today's, you'll be able to talk to each other. So I encourage you to do that. Mark, carry on. I'll take care of this
Sure, okay.
back room.
Okay. As a business, Montessori schools face some difficult challenges, in particular in relating to marketing. Teachers are your sales reps in a sense, right? They are the people who have most contact with your clientele, but it can be very difficult to evaluate their performance of your, as a sales force. There are some wonderful, wonderful teachers who just can't talk to parents. There are some who will talk to parents all day long, but maybe to the, detriment of their classroom. But you're not quite certain unless you sit there and watch them how effective they can be. In terms of representing your school. It's very difficult, as I said earlier, to demonstrate a Montessori school's quality. And every child is unique, which means that quality control, a typical business perspective, is very difficult. The industry structure poses a special challenge in that we, as Montessori schools, we are competing against this whole universe of garbage. There are some preschools and other private schools out there that are not garbage, of course. I don't mean that everyone is, other than Montessori, but frankly, most of them are garbage. And so the reality is that we are in a situation where we know what we have to offer, but it is not necessarily clear why they should spend a little bit more to go to your school when this other school down the street could be considerably less and feels more familiar to the average parent. I'm going to just skip this next slide. No, let's see. I'll skip the slide after this one. Marketing is not tricking people. One of the things that I want to talk about a little bit is that you can make a profit while providing the consumer with their margin as well. The idea being that you can actually provide more value than a customer expects or needs and still make money. But owing to time, I think we'll skip that. And maybe we can approach that some other time. All right, so the summary of this part of the conversation is find out what you're offering and then communicate it. And again, make sure that people understand what you're doing. Keep doing it. Keep communicating what it is that you have to offer. That's a big piece of marketing. If you know that what I am is a boutique, artsy school with an emphasis on outdoor learning, make sure people know that, and they keep hearing that. Um, um, don't assume in terms of retention that people know you want them to stay. I'd also say don't assume that a prospective parent knows how badly you want them to come. There may be parents that you'd be okay with enrolling, and then parents that you'd love to have enroll. Make sure that people know what you are thinking. Don't assume that they know. Don't just be hands off and unprofessional. And overly professional. Whenever there's an opportunity, communicate the value that you think that person would bring to the community. One of the challenges I always have as owning a small school is making sure people understand the expectations that we would have of them. And so I would always say, we are this kind of school. We tend to have a lot of parent involvement. What would you bring to the table? And make it a two-way conversation. And that way, I'm actually bringing parents who have some buy-in into that community. Each school is different. I don't have a right answer for you. But certainly what I would say is understand that relationship that you want to have and then communicate it constantly. All right, so we've gone through all of the difficult, complex questions that I think you need to ask yourselves, and now we've gotten to what I hope is the conversation, which is 21st century marketing techniques. So what is 21st century marketing? We asked this earlier. How is it different? How are our customers different? One of the first sections we have with marketing, one of the first elements of marketing is what I would call pull, or other people call pull as well, bringing them in. Some of the techniques. Now, you may have heard some of these. We're going to go into them into depth. Search engine optimization. I want to, again, this is kind of unusual for me because I typically present to human beings rather than to a computer screen. And so,
we are presenting to human beings. You just don't see the others.
We're all human.
I want you all to be yelling at me and asking questions.
No birds here, Mark.
Trust me, Mark, the questions are building up.
Good. So back on this slide, one of the things we know, I think we do know, is that there is a lot that is similar in that word of mouth continues to be important. Those physical interpersonal networks continue to be important. That is the same. However, we also see a significant decline in the effectiveness of print advertising. Now, there are lots of ways to measure your print advertising campaigns. One of them is to use unique phone numbers or unique web addresses in those advertisements so you can actually track the results. But I can tell you I've done that, and I've talked to many other people who've done that. And consistently what we're seeing is that our customers are coming to us through the same old ways, which is word of mouth, or through internet mechanisms. And what I mean is social media or web searches. A lot of people come to us simply by typing in preschools carry, which means that people come to us who might not necessarily even know what Montessori is at the beginning. And then we have this more significant vetting process. But because we know that's how people are coming to us, that gives us a chance to sort of tune who we reach and how we reach in that marketing channel. So bringing them in. Search engine optimization. Events and press releases. These are physical things that you would do or messages you would send out. Targeted ads. We're going to go into all these in more depth, by the way. Targeted ads, a typical example of a targeted ad, by the way, is a Google ad. If you haven't heard this phrase before, the idea would be you purchase advertisement on Google against certain searches. So if people look for preschools Cary or preschools Calgary or whatever, you'll end up with ads that might match that particular type of search. So then the question is, if you're doing targeted ads, what are the keywords? What's the location, the demographics, the time of day, the language they speak, all that other stuff. You can do giveaways. And for my own school, one of the things we do is we have a Montessori 101 PDF. And so we literally put out there, you want to learn about Montessori, give us your information. In exchange for your contact information, download this free introduction to Montessori. And actually, we get a lot of traffic to that.
I'm not sure everyone knows how to set those kinds of pages up.
That's not That's not their job. Their job is not to know how to do that. They doubtless have parents who can figure that out for them. But your job is to figure out what you want and what you need for your community, not the technology.
I think a lot of schools feel that there's just not a lot of money, not a lot of time. Everyone is really stressed. And I suspect that what people are looking for is things that make it really easy for them to solve it. Definitely agree with you that most of us do have tech savvy parents. If we can get them to do anything, that's great. Quite often, they're just catch as catch can.
Right. And then you
Well,
get inconsistency in the model, so I may want to do this, and a lot of schools might want to, and I get a parent who can hit and miss, but I believe, and maybe Mark helped me think, consistency is a very large part of what any of these things are going to have. So, if we don't have a parent, or we're sort of in a small school and we have to figure these things out on our own, what's your advice? What direction would you go?
well, my school started with one student, and my funding method was my pocket. I spent very, very, very little on marketing. I mean, Let me give you some examples. For events, I I knew some Costa Rican dancers, just literally just friends of friends kind of thing, and got them to agree to. I think I paid them. I mean, it was like $50, and I got them to agree to dance. And then we had parents bring in some potluck, and I called it an international day, right? And it was a lot of fun, by the way. I mean, even though it was done on the cheap, it was still a lot of fun. Um, so that kind of thing could be great. It's up to the community. We didn't have a whole lot of community members come, but we had like maybe 10, 15, and some of those enrolled. It did actually work. Press releases. There's a thing we did called the Little Free Library. You may have heard of it. The idea is you offer a free library of books to the community. You put it outside. It is available all the time. In our case, we focused on children's books. We knew that not too far from us there are these apartment buildings with sort of a poor income demographic. And we thought, well, gee, there's real value in offering free books. Now, are these people necessarily going to enroll in our school? Maybe not. I don't know. I mean, the finances being what they are, some of them certainly wouldn't even consider it. But that wasn't the point. The point was we were doing something good that we could feel good about legitimately, and at the same time, we got coverage in the newspaper for doing that. We got coverage because we wrote it up. We said a press release to someone who we knew covered the education feed and said, hey, this is what we're doing, blah, 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 and she thought that was awesome, and she came by, and they took pictures, and it was in the newspaper. How much did it cost us? It cost us a shelf and some parent-donated books. All these things are just great. Marketing does not need to be expensive. In fact, I have spent, let me think about this. I think I spent about $500 a year on marketing. I'd have to get Rachel to say if that number is correct or not, but that seems right to me. So we stopped the print advertisements, right? We stopped those completely. Those were very expensive, and they were getting no traffic for us. And so now we do spend a little bit of money on these targeted ads on Google, and we typically spend about $1 per what's called a click-through, and that's basically the biggest amount of spend. Is just a little bit of Google ads. The PDF, the free PDF piece that I told you about. Now, I knew how to do that, so I already had some technical skills because that is really my background. So for that case, it really didn't cost me anything. I admit you would have to find someone who could do that, but it wasn't that hard. I mean, literally, all we're talking about is a simple form where people enter their email address and their name and maybe some information about what they know about Montessori. I don't remember what is on our form off the top of my head. And in exchange, they get a page that lets them download a PDF that has information about Montessori. That gives us the opportunity to follow up based on what we know about them from the form and things like that. It costs nothing, right? Other than the setup. Once it's set up, it costs nothing. So.
We're getting some great questions. First off, again, I've opened up the room I mentioned, and if anyone is so inclined, Devora, feel free to go there because conversation is beginning. People are asking lots of questions. One is from Susan, again, who's saying, but when these bonds are strong, isn't there a fear of losing the entire group of complainers? I think this is such a basic thing. I just got to jump in and say, look,
Yes.
first up, it's all about admissions. This
And
is
by the way,
such,
I'm smiling. I just want to say, if anyone's seeing me smile, it's smiling because it's such a good question.
yeah, it's a
That
great
it's a
question.
really very common and good question.
Hey, listen, the Montessori Foundation, in case you didn't know it or haven't been in one yourself in the past, runs online courses. The next ones start on October 1st. One of them is a shortened version of the course on recruitment and admissions. It's called Finding the Perfect Match. I highly recommend it, Susan, for you and anyone else who's trying to figure out how to go into depth on some of these things. Mark, I hope you'll kibitz, because I think it would be neat if you could do a little webinar just teaching people how to do something as simple as the survey and the landing page. It's a really great idea. Um, we also have a longer course called Building a World-Class Montessori School that also starts on the 1st. If you haven't taken it, I know Kathy has been through that several times over the years and can say something to that perhaps in a minute. I do want to say one last thing. Monthly class and community meetings. I'm going to schedule a webinar in this series in a few weeks just on that topic, but I'm telling you that is the safety valve that allows you to take what would normally be the whispering going on at birthday parties or in the parking lot or whatever and turns it into something that's positive. It's all about the admitting positive parents. It's all about listening to this kind of rumbling and having a really good way of responding to it. And it's all about creating a safe environment where people can ask questions and bring them out in a way where you know it's happening and you can respond to it on the spot or afterwards in an appropriate manner. And I'm simplifying a very complicated process.
I I totally agree with everything you just said. In fact, that's something that so growing up at Berry School when my dad was running it, I got used to these community meetings, and so that was instinctive to me to bring them to my school, um, and certainly that has been a key to our success, and we are doing pretty well, I think, for a 3-year-old school. Not that we're again ever going to change the world at we have like 55 kids, I think. But it all comes down to this idea that we are accessible, that we genuinely want to hear what complaints and concerns they have, that this is a safe space to air those things. You can't fake this stuff, right? I mean, you are the spiritual head of your school, and if you don't set the correct tone, then unfortunately it is going to fester. And this is sort of those soft skills that are hard to communicate. That I do believe it is possible to improve these things if you are not instinctively good at them. It just comes down to catching yourself when you find yourself being defensive, as we always are.
It's about teaching people too at these meetings. What is healthy communication and how do we build healthy communities? I think the more we model that, the more we stand for that, people will start almost self-correcting or helping each other stay in line when someone gets out of line. Oh, please bring it up at the community meeting. Or, have you gone and talked to Mark about this? Because these are things that, people will, once they realize that this is the way healthy communities operate, and these are the same skills we're asking our students to engage in every day, they're more inclined to try to help each other with it.
I love that, and one of the things that I've actually said to parents a few times, and maybe I should do even more, is like they'll issue a complaint or a concern, and I'll say, I'll bet you're not the only person feeling that. I hope you will air that, because I think that's something we need to address. That, in other words, not only do I honor what they're saying, but I'm saying, hey, I think what you're saying has value, and I want you to share that.
I want to say that, again, one of our most active participants today has been Shelley. She's throwing really wonderful comments and questions, not all of which I've put out, because she's almost got a commentary going with the three of us behind the scenes, and I love it. Shelley, based on what I'm hearing from you, and to summarize it, it's, boy, in our area, the cost of sending a child to early childhood is really high. Because of this, we're digging so deeply into people's pockets by the standards of what they feel they can afford because in New York City, to send a child to preschool is $3,000 or $4,000 a month, but you don't get to pay it by the month. You pay it up front. Um, and our own alma mater, the Barry School, where Mark and I and our family went, I think, gosh, I don't know what the current cost is, but it's way over $20,000 a year a
Oh,
child.
way more, I'm sure. Yeah.
So the bottom line is what Shelley is saying, and I think it's a key point, and maybe one that we can sort of work to wrap up. She's saying that she's feeling like because they're so deep into these parents' pockets, they are demanding so much, and she's feeling that basically she's almost drawing in parents who think that because they're paying this much, they should have egg in their beers, that they have the power. Money is power. I don't know how the
Well,
two of you feel. I
money
don't. I
does
don't
have
buy
power.
this.
Well, money
I
has power, but we moving people out of this contract mentality that they are buying a service rather than in community, rather than in relationship with
mhm.
educators and and other families is a big shift. And I don't know how much of this is generational. I've seen some of the research on this that, this newer generation of parents is really looking at what can they buy. Everything's a service they can buy. And I'm looking at how do we move people out of that thinking into being in community and being in relationship. It's a very different mentality than this
Well,
contract. I paid you to provide me a
yeah,
service.
I would actually say that I think this has always been there. I think there's always, I don't think
Yeah.
it's generational. I think there's always been
Mm.
some parents like this.
Mm-hmm.
I think it really comes down to who are you attracting to your school, and are you communicating what you want to communicate? Certainly when my daughter was at the the fancy Shishi Montessori school in Raleigh, and that one was almost 20,000 a year, and and it was outrageous, and I really thought very hard about what is the school trying to do, and one of the things that I observed was yes, exactly that mentality from not all, but some, many, maybe even of the other parents. Um, that said, that doesn't mean that all schools are that way, but it does mean that, or all parents are all that way, but it does mean that it's something you need to understand is going to occur.
Mm-hmm.
And communicating, just as you said, Kathy, what we are selling, what we are marketing is a learning community. It is not simply a factory that shoves information inside of children's heads. Again, it's a hard thing to do, but selecting the right parents is a big thing. Parent education is another important piece.
I
Well, I
think
can
that.
tell that we're going to need another part to this. I
Yeah,
think we're going to
Well,
need
it's
part
funny
two.
because we haven't even gotten to the the really yummy part.
Well,
yeah.
I think we've made some really interesting discoveries this morning.
I think
All
that
right.
these courses are worth every dollar that everyone's paying for them. So I want to remind you that this is a series of free webinars that we offer every week. Um, they really are an extension of the live courses or the online courses that we offer through the Montessori Leadership Institute. They go into much, 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 much more depth. And the reason why we do those courses is because it's much cheaper than hiring any of us as consultants by the hour. The leadership courses are currently not designed to be a professional certification program. They are essentially meant to help people like us learn the things that we are really hungry to learn in a way that is much, much cheaper than any other way. I will tell you what I've noticed over the years is people are constantly asking other heads, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? And quite a bit of that is very useful and quite a bit of it is nonsense because many people really don't know how to escape. They're in the same rut. That's why we created the Montessori Foundation, is because as an officer of the American Montessori Society and as somebody who was really trying to help Montessori schools, Nancy McCormick Rambush and others and I felt that there was a need for an organization that could really be of serious help to you. Every Montessori organization, AMS, AMI, IMC, does things for its heads of schools, but it doesn't come close to what's really needed. The money and the emphasis is generally on teacher education. Something else, Shelley, you said, I've heard Mark before. far as I know, you've heard Mark before, probably once, unless you've come down to Raleigh or heard him online through the Center for
No, no,
Guided.
I saw her in Calgary, I
Yeah,
believe.
that's right. You saw her in Calgary.
Yes.
And my point was this, Kathy, how many times have you heard this stuff before it really sunk in?
Well, I've been hearing it every year for 22 years, Tim, so I just keep coming back for more.
and
I
and
don't know
I
about
and
seasonal.
I heard it. I mean, I heard it from Mark's grandmother. I mean, one of the things, by the way, she used to tell us is anything living is trouble. Anything living takes work. Our parents and our teachers are a piece of work. I mean, some of them are easy to deal with, some of them are really hard, but they're all wonderful. But not everyone needs to be in your school. The kids are wonderful, but not every one of them needs to be in your school. The long and the short of it is this information, there's a lot to it, and Mark has just gotten going. I really do encourage you to watch for an upcoming webinar where Mark hopefully can be sprung free from his incredibly busy schedule and do another session. I know that we've had a number of people ask whether the slides will be available. Everything we're doing right now is being recorded. And I don't know that, having seen the slides, I don't think they're terribly useful on their own. So what I'd say is watch for the email that'll come from me shortly with the links to all of the webinars that have occurred in the series. It usually takes me about 48 hours before I finish and get it uploaded and send out an email to you, but it will come out and it will remind you about the next seminar series. So Mark, do you think you can make another hour free and continue this wonderful presentation?
I'm sure I can, though I don't know when that would be. I'd have to look at my schedule. As I said, this was really just almost everything until that slide was sort of preamble to make sure we understood what we were looking at.
There you go.
The concrete suggestions we're just getting started. So what I would say is that my email address is hopefully visible to you guys, but if not, it's mark@markselden.com. That's Mark with a C, at markselden.com. I'm happy to try to answer any questions you have, and I'll certainly try to make myself available for a future conference.
Sure.
I would love to have you back again, Mark. I think
Oh,
it's really
absolutely.
useful.
By the way, coming up in the next week, as far as I know, next Thursday, we're going to have an informal conversation with Dr. Steve Hughes. Steve is going to be down with us in Sarasota for about 5 days. We're hoping we can get him in front of the microphone. So barring a late plane flight or something like that, I'm hoping that that's who you'll be talking with next week. Steve Hughes is one of the leading Montessori researchers. He's a neuropsychologist specializing in pediatric neuropsychology. He is a brain researcher, and he is the chair of the AMI Research Initiative. And he is a member of the Montessori Leaders Collaborative with me and with the heads of AMS and AMI and many other wonderful Montessori leaders around the country. Kathy and I will be here one way or the other, and we'll be talking very soon. I'll let you all know as soon as I reach Steve later today whether he's booked that flight in such a way that we can safely predict. He did say he was coming on a Wednesday night, which should have him here for Thursday. The following week, October 2nd, the topic that week is going to be a national discussion with three major leaders in the public Montessori environment. We're going to talk about, is public Montessori a promise or is it a challenge, and how does it all work? Is it possible to do Montessori in charter and magnet and just general neighborhood public schools well? As you know, there's now about 500 public Montessori schools. Are they a threat to the private Montessori school community? Certainly we know they can be. One of the questions is, how can you articulate to your parents why they should pay if you are running an independent Montessori school when people can have it for free? What do you do? And I know several of you have been talking in the informal chats with me. What do you do about Montessomething, the schools that basically mishmash a whole bunch of stuff and call it Montessori? And I can tell you that any public Montessori school faces that challenge every day, not because they want to, but because they have to serve the master of the local school district and the state or provincial Ministry of Education. We're going to have with us Dr. Jeannie Riga, former coordinator of Montessori education for the State Department of Education in South Carolina. Currently a researcher and school consultant to many public Montessori schools. We're going to have Josie Zinniger, who is the principal of the Lakeland, Florida Montessori Children's House. And we are going to have Dr. Jackie Cosentino, who is the co-chair of the National Center for Montessori in the Public Sector. This is a very impressive group of very, very bright people, and I hope you'll join us for that particular session. And I'll be sending confirmation of all of that out. Mark, I think that you and Kathy and I ought to look at what you've begun, because yours looks like more than a simple 1 hour presentation. And maybe
I did warn you.
Yes, you did. And you know what? That was a great hour. Don't worry about it. We don't have to cover everything in one session. What we may want to do, though, is figure out whether we want to do some kind of special program, because I think, while not everyone may be really that interested in any one topic, when you get a topic this good and this vital to the future of schools, it's worth going into in great depth. We've run over time, and I am so sorry, and I'm looking at lots and lots of information about this. By the way, I see John Carroll asked the question whether you hear public Montessori leaders. I hope you heard that the answer was yes when we talk on October 2nd. And I'll be, over the course of the year, I'll be having a wide range of my friends and colleagues from the Montessori world. But remember, this is just a small outreach of the Montessori Foundation's Center for Montessori Leadership, or Montessori Leadership Institute. It's used by both names. And lastly, I want to tell you that Mark and Kathy and Paul Epstein and I are working on a couple of other projects, one of which is the development of a certification credential that will hopefully be accredited by MACD and affiliated with the International Montessori Council, a collaborative effort between the Montessori Foundation and the Center for Guided Montessori Studies for Montessori school leaders. We are looking to try to have a master's in Montessori, a master's in Montessori educational leadership connected to that, but one way or the other, we are intending to develop a first-rate Montessori leadership credential. And no date officially for the launch, but I can tell you it'll be more than 12 months from now. We've got a lot of work to do. Mark, any last words from you?
No, thank you all for your time.
Mark, thank you for your time. I know how you took off work today, and your bird is not on your shoulder as you were planning to have. Mark has a wonderful bird named Biko, who was talking to Kathy and I. We suggested it might be hard to put Biko away if Biko became naughty. And I've seen Biko begin to get naughty when he starts eating things like Mark's headphone wires. Mark, I love you, son, and I so appreciate that you took time to join us. And you and I and Kathy will figure out when you're available next. And Kathy, as always, thanks for joining us. I'm sorry our other co-host, Lorna McGrath, couldn't be here. She is taking the first vacation in many, many years and is somewheres off in the wilds of the southwest of the United States. So wherever you are out there, Mrs. Lorna McGrath, we wish you well and a happy vacation. Goodbye, everybody. Tim Selden.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Tim Selden from the
Bye-bye.
Montessori Foundation, signing off.